Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. And that brings up another interesting point too, is because the way that Yahweh did that was through the flood, and this has been something that's had a lot of contention throughout the years. And I mean, I love the discussion. I don't hold firmly to one position or another. I lean towards one, but and this is something that we talked about the last time you were on, but I'd like to revisit it and see if you have any new insights on again, something that I've always been curious about. There are two or three main different ideas to explain how the Nephilim or the giants came back after the flood. And again, like I said, I don't hold tightly to any of these. The two or three that I'm aware of, I can see any one of them could be possible. I lean towards one because it seems to make more sense. But I'm curious, what do you think happened to explain the presence of the Nephilim in the post-flood world?
Well, my personal opinion. Well, hold on. I'll come back to my opinion at the end. All right. So the three that I've heard, number one was more angels. They just kept coming back after the flood. They were here. They did it again. Uh, Number two, uh, somehow, some way, Yahweh allowed the DNA from the fallen angels onto the ark, and they were preserved just like all of the different animals somehow. And number three, Dr. Ken Johnson has a book. Oh no, I'm sorry. It's the Book of Jubilees. Dr. Ken Johnson mentioned this in one of his books. But anyway, the Book of Jubilees talks about how one of Noah's grandsons finds the hidden writings of the Watchers. Uh, he neglects to tell Noah about it because he's afraid of Noah's anger, Noah getting upset at him. Uh, Now, I don't know how many people have ever really talked about the hidden writing of the Watchers from Jubilees as being a cause of the Nephilim after the flood, but I definitely feel like that is a possibility. Um, the Book of Jubilees, this particular grandson is not mentioned in the Bible. Uh, Now, maybe it's because he was left out on purpose. Maybe it's a bad translation of a name. It could be a number of different things of why, but I feel like that is definitely a possibility that somehow, some way, the Watchers wrote down, on some kind of a stone. It would have stone to be there after flood, but I definitely feel like it's a possibility that he read it. He was able to uh, do something to himself. I know Nimrod was able to become a giant or Nephilim by doing some sort of uh, sexual perversion to himself. And that was coming from, I believe, Mr. Doug Hamp. I think that was his interpretation of how Nimrod was able to do it, or it could be Tom Horn. I listen to so many of these guys, I get them confused. But one of those two guys were able to bring up the good point of how he began to become a mighty man through some kind of a sexual perversion, and so that is possible. The angels coming back to continually do it, continually have sex with women and procreate. Uh, Rob Skiba makes a great point on if that were the case, how come they were a lot smaller? Um, how come there weren't, how come they're not over flooding, just overruling the whole world right now? Because the Book of Enoch tells us they had 500 years to do what they did, and in those 500 years, everybody but one family, Noah's wife, and his three children were the only ones that weren't affected. That was in 500 years. We've had roughly 2,500 years? No, 4,500 years since then, something like that.
Yeah.
If it was 4,500 years, I mean, that's what, 4 or 5 times the amount of time. How are they not everywhere? How are there not more skeletal remains that we just never found of these ridiculous sized bones. I mean, Book of Enoch tells us that they were up to 400 feet, or roughly 400 feet tall. I read in Antiquity of the Jews that these original Nephilim were what the Greeks called the Titans. If that's the case, and the angels were continually doing it, where are they? How did they continually get smaller and smaller and smaller? That doesn't work out for me. And on top of that, the Book of Enoch, I believe it's chapter 68. Don't quote me on that one. I know it's later on, but the angel Michael says something along the lines of the penalty was so harsh that no other angel would ever dare commit that sin. So if Michael is telling us that no angel is going to do it, we have no physical evidence. There's no the 500 years and the 4,500 years. They're obviously not everywhere. I mean, I've never seen a 400 footer ever. So I feel like that's definitely not really a possibility. So I feel like the angels continually procreating is just kind of thrown out. Now I have heard Minister Fortson talk about they started doing artificial insemination. They weren't really having sex with women. They were just procreating through artificial insemination. That is still possible. I don't feel like that's where the giants came from after the flood. I feel like that's more along the lines of what we have now. I do feel it's Greek mythology creatures. I do definitely feel like that was there before the flood, but we could have seen some of that stuff afterwards as well, with some of the science experiments gone wrong by artificial insemination. But I definitely don't feel like that is the cause of the giants after the flood. The best, most biblically supported version of how they came after, in my opinion, is the DNA came on the ark, came through the flood with at least one of the three wives. And that is the case, it's if just say two of the wives had the DNA, or even if all three of them had the Nephilim DNA. Rob Skiba pointed this out. He does a great what do you call it, the Punnett square on how it plays out and the chances of having a normal human child and having the half man, half monster child. Basically, it looks to me that Yahweh gave himself a 1 in 3 chance. So we have one group of righteous family members, and then you have the 2/3 that are against that one righteous family, all in the end. And if you take 2/3 and you break it down into a decimal, you get it's 66.6666. I mean, it works out great. I'm definitely not a huge coincidence man. I don't remember where I heard this, but somewhere along the lines, after I started really getting into the Bible, somebody said that they don't believe in coincidences. They believe that all coincidences are really just God working in disguise. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. That really works for me. So that was just one of those coincidences. If it's 2/3 and it comes out to be 666, and those are the bad guys, I mean, that works for me. But so one of the arguments that I've heard is, well, if the whole point of the flood was to wipe out all these giants, then why would Yahweh allow for that same DNA to get on the flood and just happen again? Well, that is a good question, but I don't feel like it's a bad idea, because if you start getting into a little bit outside of the Torah, get into Joshua, and I think even Deuteronomy and Numbers, but you see Joshua and Caleb, they're going out and they're killing all of these Nephilim giants, all of these other gods in all these other cities. and they come to, I don't remember her name. They come to this city, and this one girl helps them out, and I don't remember her name.
Rahab.
Rahab. And they said, first thing she says was, "Oh, you're the Israelites. We're all afraid of you. We know that your God is with you, and we're all scared." So if you look at it like that, in the end, if God allows for just a small amount of Nephilim DNA to come on, even outnumbers himself just a little bit, it all goes for his glory. He had other cultures all around that part of the world were completely scared to death of these Israelites. So they were safe. They weren't going to attack these guys because they were scared of them. And these guys were able to go over and take what God promised them, because these giants were afraid of them. And if the giants were afraid of them, and these are people's gods, dude, our gods are afraid of their gods, so we better follow them. It in my opinion, allowing the DNA to get on the ark was a good thing. And I didn't want to lead off with that because people would probably turn it off. This guy's crazy. But after saying why I feel that way, I think it makes sense. I mean, it was for Yahweh's glory. It was a positive, and I just feel like that the Nephilim blood on the ark was definitely the only realistic way for me. I am a little bit firm on that. I definitely don't believe that angels continue to have sex with humans. The Noah's grandson thing, it's possible that it a little bit some way, one way or another, but it's really possible that could have been, that hidden writing could have been something completely different. As far as I know, that was a way to the animal human hybrid could have been those kind of Nephilim, what we're doing today. Maybe he could read it. Maybe he was able to do something with it. Somehow that got lost along the way, but we're finding it again. I don't know if that's it, but it would mean that the hidden writings of the Watchers contributed directly to Nephilim after the ark. It was just, I came when I was reading Jubilees, and I was like, man, that's definitely. I think it makes the most. It is interesting. That would be the best way to leave that one.
Yeah, I hear you. It bring up a lot of interesting points, and yeah, it's definitely something to think about. And that by the way is the opinion that I lean towards as well, because it's the best one that can be, like you said, the most biblically supported, and I've heard the best arguments toward that point. So that's the one I lean toward as well for all the same reasons.